The rain drummed softly against the windows of the old Victorian manor, a rhythmic symphony that echoed through its empty halls. Faint moonlight seeped through heavy curtains, casting long quivering shadows on the wooden floorboards. The air smelled faintly of aged mahogany and rain-soaked earth, creating an oddly comforting blend that wrapped the house in a melancholy embrace. Down the dimly lit hallway, the grandfather clock ticked steadily, its pendulum slicing through the silence like a metronome, marking time and forgotten melody. Everything seemed still, serene, even until it wasn't a whisper, faint, barely audible, but unmistakable. It curled through the air, slipping into the corners of the house. Like a wisp of smoke, Olivia froze in the armchair, where she had been reading her novel, forgotten in her lap, leaned forward, straining to hear beyond the rain, and the clock's steady beat. The whisper came again, this time clearer, a voice, delicate and childlike, though the words remained elusive. Better heat. The house creaked, softly as though it too had heard the sound. Olivia's eyes darted toward the hallway, her heart a quiet drum beneath her ribs. But the hallway was empty, its shadows undisturbed. Perhaps it was her imagination, she told herself, or maybe the sound of the rain playing tricks on her still. She found herself unable to look away from the hallways. Darkness, as if it were watching her back. Olivia had never believed in the supernatural, not really a historian by profession. She prided herself on grounding her thoughts in facts. Evidence. This house, with its creaky floors and dark corners, was no different to her. It was a piece of history, a remnant of a bygone era, a place filled with stories waiting to be uncovered. She had rented it for the month to finish her manuscript on Victorian architecture, hoping its isolation keep distractions at bay. But tonight, as the rain poured steadily outside and the whisper still echoed faintly in her memory, she couldn't help but feel uneasy. The house had a way of amplifying its own silence, turning every small sound into something larger, something alive. She shook her head and stood, her slippered feet barely making a sound, on the polished wooden floor. The hallway stretched before her, dimly lit by a single scone near the stairs. She glanced at the grandfather clock, 11:47 p.m., not quite midnight, but close enough to feel the weight of the hour. Olivia decided to make tea, more for the comfort of the ritual than the drink itself. The kitchen was at the far end of the hallway, its entrance framed by ornate molding. Her eyes flicked to the walls, where faded portraits of unknown faces seemed to watch her. Every step she had noticed them earlier. In the week, their somber gazes unnerving. Even in daylight, in the kitchen she busied herself with the kettle, her hands moving automatically. She tried to focus on the sound of the boiling water, the clink of the spoon against the porcelain cup, but her mind kept drifting back to the whisper. "My gift," she whispered at the time of day. Nobody noticed. She rationalized it again. It was probably the wind. Or houses, like this one, had a tendency to groan and sigh, their wooden frames expanding and contracting with the weather. She repeated these thoughts like a mantra, willing herself to believe them. As she stirred the tea, she glanced out the window above the sink. The rain blurred the glass, turning the world outside into an ear color of grays and blacks. Beyond the garden, the tree line of the nearby woods loomed like a dark wall, impenetrable and vast. A movement caught her eye, a flicker of something in the garden. She leaned closer, her breath fogging the glass. For a moment she thought she saw a figure, a child small and pale, standing among the hedges, but when she blinked, it was gone, leaving only the rain-soaked shadows swaying in the wind. Her heartbeat quickened as she turned away from the window, gripping her tea tightly. She wasn't prone to paranoia, but something about this night felt different. She returned to the sitting room, the warmth of the fire offering a brief comfort. She picked up her book again, determined to lose herself in its pages. But as she settled into the chair, the whisper came again, this time closer. It was clearer now, unmistakable. A child's voice, soft and melodic, calling her name, Olivia. The cup of tea trembled in her hand. She set it down carefully, her eyes scanning the room. "Hello," she called, her voice steady, the chill creeping up her spine. No response. The hallway seemed darker now, its shadows thicker, more alive. She felt a pull, an inexplicable urge to step closer, to peer into its depths. She rose slowly, her movements hesitant, approached the threshold. "Olivia." The voice came again, a sing-song whisper that sent shivers down her arms. It was coming from the direction of the grandfather clock. She stepped into the hallway, her feet silent against the floorboards. The air felt colder here, heavier. The clock loomed ahead, pendulum swinging steadily, each tick echoing like a heartbeat. Then she saw it just beyond the clock, at the edge of the light, a small figure, pale and delicate, standing motionless. It was a child, a little girl in a white nightgown, hair damp, as though she'd been standing in the rain. "Who are you, Olivia?" asked her voice, trembling. The girl didn't answer. She tilted her head slightly, her face obscured by the shadows. Then, as the clock struck midnight, the girl raised a hand and pointed toward the end of the hallway, toward the closed door. Olivia hadn't yet explored the sound of the clock's chime, reverberated through the house, each note louder than the last. By the time it stopped, the girl was gone, leaving only the faintest trace of rainwater on the floor where she had stood. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. The whispering had stopped, but her unease had deepened. The door at the end of the hallway seemed to beckon her now, its presence impossible to ignore. She hesitated, her rational mind worrying with her instincts, but she knew she wouldn't be able to rest until she opened it. Olivia stood frozen in the hallway, her eyes fixed on the door at the far end. It was an unassuming wooden door, its surface unremarkable except for a tarnished brass handle, yet in the oppressive silence of the house, it seemed to hum with the presence of its own. She took a step forward, then another, the floorboards creaking beneath her weight. Her breath felt shallow, her heartbeat loud in her ears. The faint trace of rainwater on the floor where the girl had stood shimmered briefly in the dim light, before vanishing alto. Reaching the door, Olivia hesitated. She placed her hand on the brass handle, its coldness biting into her skin. The air here was different, denser, as though the hallway itself was holding its breath. When she finally turned the handle, the door creaked open to reveal a narrow staircase spiraling downward. A faint draft carried the scent of damp earth and something older, muskier, as though the space below had been sealed away for decades. "Well, is there a basement?" murmured to herself. None of the house's documentation had mentioned one. Her phone's flashlight was her only source of light. As she ascended the stairs, groaned with every step, the sound amplified by the cavernous space below. As she reached the bottom, the beam of her light cut through the thick darkness, revealing a large stone room. The walls were lined with shelves, each crowded with objects, shrouded in dust, jars of murky liquid, brittle books with cracked spines, and peculiar trinkets that glinted faintly under the flashlight. At the center of the room was a small wooden table, and atop it lay a music box. Olivia approached cautiously, her steps echoing on the stone floor. The music box was intricately carved, its surface depicting scenes of children playing in a meadow it seemed untouched by time, its polished surface gleaming in stark contrast to the room's decay. She reached out her fingers, grazing the box's smooth edges. The moment she touched it, a faint melody began to play, soft and lilting, like a lullaby carried on a whisper. Olivia. The voice came again, startling, enough that she nearly dropped the music box. She spun around the flashlight, sweeping over the room, but it revealed nothing except shadows. "Who's there?" she demanded. Her voice trembling. Room remained silent, save for the haunting melody of the music box. Olivia's chest tightened as her eyes darted to the shelves. One of the books had fallen, its pages fanned out as though inviting her to read against her better judgment. She stepped closer and knelt to pick it up. The book was heavier than it looked, its leather cover worn, but intact. The title, embossed in faded gold lettering, read "The Forgotten Children." She opened it, her fingers trembling as she flipped through pages filled with sketches of faces, children's faces. Each sketch was accompanied by a name and a date, some as far back as the 1800s. A cold realization settled over her. These weren't just drawings, they were memorials. The whispering returned louder, now overlapping voices, filling the room like a chorus. Olivia dropped the book, stumbling backward as the shadows on the walls began to shift, and her flashlight flickered, plunging her into brief moments of darkness. When the light returned, the little girl stood before her, no longer shadowed, but fully visible. Her eyes were hollow, her skin pale as moonlight. "Help us," the girl whispered, her voice layered with the echoes of many others. Olivia's heart raced as the room seemed to close in around her. The girl pointed toward the music box. "What do you want me to do?" Olivia asked, her voice barely audible. The girl didn't respond, but her gaze lingered on the music box. Taking a deep breath, Olivia reached for it again. This time, as she turned the crank, the melody grew louder, distorted. The air around her vibrated, the shadows coalescing into figures. Children, dozens of them, their faces etched with sorrow. Each one stared at Olivia, their eyes pleading. She understood now. They were trapped here, bound to the house by something far darker than she could fathom. "What happened to you?" she whispered. The little girl stepped closer, her fingers brushing Olivia's hand. Images flooded her mind. Children playing in the meadow, depicted on the music box, their laughter echoing under a bright summer sky. Then darkness, the same meal, now barren and shrouded in mist. A figure cloaked in shadow, leading the children away one by one. The connection broke, leaving Olivia gasping for air. The girl's eyes brimmed with tears as she pointed once more, this time toward a small, hidden door at the far side of the basement. Olivia's legs felt limp as she approached it, the whispers growing louder with each step. The door was padlocked, but the rusted metal crumbled under her touch. She pushed it open to reveal a smaller room, its walls lined with tiny beds. Each bed held a single object, a toy, a ribbon, a small shoe, all carefully placed as though waiting for their owners to return. In the center of the room was a large chest, its lid carved with the same meadow scene. Olivia hesitated, her hands trembling as she lifted the lid. Inside were more artifacts, locks of hair, photographs, Small notes. She realized these were keepsakes, the last remnants of the children who had vanished. The shadows in the room began to dissolve, their whispers fading into the melody of the music box. The little girl appeared one final time, her expression one of gratitude. She reached out her translucent hand, brushing Olivia's cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, before fading into the air, leaving Olivia alone in the dim light of her flashlight. The silence in the small room was suffocating, broken only by Olivia's shallow breaths and the faint hum of the music box. Melody drifting in from the main chamber. She stared at the chest's contents, the weight of the keepsakes pressing heavily on her chest. It wasn't just a basement. It was a crypt for memories, a shrine to loss. The air around her shifted, growing colder, as though the room itself resented her presence. She stood, her legs unsteady, and turned to leave. But the doorway to the main chamber now seemed impossibly far, the shadows between her and the exit darker and more solid than before. As she stepped forward, the music box's melody faltered, the notes twisting into a distorted wail. A new sound joined the fray, a low guttural growl that sent a primal chill down Olivia's spine from the corner of the room. The shadows began to coalesce once more, forming a shape. It wasn't the children this time. It was something ancient and wrong. The figure was tall and gaunt, its limbs unnaturally elongated, its face obscured by a swirling mass of darkness. Creature stepped closer, its movement slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment. Olivia stumbled backward, her flashlight trembling in her hand. The beam of light illuminated the creature's hollow chest, where faint glimmers of light swirled like tiny stars trapped in an endless void. She realized with a jolt that these were the children's souls, imprisoned within the entity. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Pray." The creature tilted its head, a low rumbling laugh emanating from deep within its form. The music box's distorted melody seemed to pulse in time with the glow in its chest, as if it were the key to the creature's existence. Desperation gripped Olivia as the entity took another step forward, its claw-like fingers reaching out. She looked down at the music box, still clutched in her hands, its intricate carvings now glowing faintly. The girl's whisper echoed in her mind, soft but insistent. "Set us free." Olivia didn't know what would happen, but she knew she had no other choice. With trembling hands, she turned. The music boxes crank once more, forcing the melody to play. The notes rang out clear and pure, cutting through the oppressive darkness. Like a blade, the creature recoiled, a guttural roar filling the room as its form wavered. The glow in its chest intensified the trapped lights, flickering wildly. "Come on," Olivia urged, cranking the box faster. The melody grew louder, more insistent, drowning out the creature's roars. The children's voices joined the song, their whispers rising in a harmonious crescendo. One by one, the lights in the creature's chest broke free, shooting upward like tiny comets, their glow illuminating the room in bursts of warmth and color. The entity writhed its form, disintegrating with each escaping soul. The shadows dissolved, replaced by a soft golden light that filled the basement. The oppressive cold lifted, replaced by a comforting warmth that made Olivia's knees buckle. She fell to the ground, the music box slipping from her hands. It landed with a soft thud, its melody fading into silence. As the last of the souls ascended for a moment, the room was completely still. Then from the corner of her eye, Olivia saw the little girl again. She stood in the doorway, her face serene, her translucent form glowing softly. "Thank you," the girl whispered one final time. She smiled, a small, all bittersweet expression, and then she too faded, her presence leaving behind only a faint warmth. Olivia sat in the silence, her heart still racing. The creature was gone, the children were free, and the house had returned to a former quiet, stillness. But the weight of what had happened lingered, pressing down on her like the remnants of a nightmare. The golden light faded slowly, leaving the basement bathed in a soft, natural dimness. Olivia remained on the cold stone floor, her breaths gradually slowing as the tension in her body began to ease. The air, once heavy and suffocating, now felt light and clean, carrying a faint scent of rain and earth. He glanced around the room, half expecting to see the creature re-emerge from the shadows, but the basement was still, and the oppressive energy that had loomed moments ago was entirely gone. Even the walls, once marked by the weight of time and sorrow, seemed lighter, as though the house itself had been unburdened. Olivia's gaze fell to the music box lying a few feet away. It no longer glowed, its carvings now appearing as ordinary as they had when she first found it. She reached out and picked it up, her fingers brushing its smooth surface. The box was quiet, but it radiated a sense of peace, as though its purpose had finally been fulfilled. Gathering her strength, Olivia stood and dusted herself off. Her knees were weak, and her hands still trembled, but she felt an odd calm settle over her. The children were free. She was sure of it. Their whispers no longer haunted the air, replaced by a soothing silence that wrapped around her like a warm blanket. He turned toward the door to the staircase, the path now clear and inviting. As she ascended, the faintest hint of dawn began to break through the windows above. The rain had stopped, leaving the world outside glistening with day. Back in the sitting room, Olivia collapsed onto the sofa, the familiar warmth of the fireplace a welcome contrast to the chill of the basement. She stared into the flickering flames, her mind replaying the nights of events. Had it all really happened? The whispers, the children, the creature. The rational part of her wanted to dismiss it as a vivid hallucination, brought on by exhaustion. But the music box in her lap, with its intricate carvings and unshakable presence, was proof enough that it hadn't been a dream. As she sat there, the house seemed to exhale its creaks and groans, no longer menacing, but comforting, like an old friend settling in for a long rest. She could feel its gratitude, a quiet thank you for breaking the cycle of despair that had gripped it for so long. The first rays of sunlight streamed through the curtains, painting the room in soft hues of gold and pink. The storm had passed, and with it the house's LGH held darkness. Olivia took a deep breath, letting the warmth of the morning seep into her. She wasn't sure what she would do next, whether she would stay in the house or leave it behind. But for now she allowed herself a moment of stillness, of reflection. Somewhere in the distance, a bird chirped its song, light and carefree. The world was waking up, and with it so was Olivia, as the morning sun bathed the old house in its golden light. Olivia stood by the window, the music box cradled in her hands. She gazed at the meadow beyond, where the fog had finally lifted, revealing a serene and vibrant landscape. For a moment, she thought she saw the faint outline of children running through the grass. Their laughter carried on the gentle breeze. Then, like the morning mist, they vanished, leaving only a sense of peace in their wake. Olivia smiled faintly, her heart lighter And it had been in years. She placed the music box on the windowsill, its carvings catching the sunlight. And as the world outside came alive with the promise of a new day, she whispered to the house, "You're free now." The house creaked softly in response, as if to say, "So are you."